The Pistol Spread Option Offense, home of playbooks, user community highlights, coaching insights, and much, much more. Be a better coach at pistolspreadoption.com. Welcome back, everybody. This is Coach Anthony Pratley back with the Pistol Spread Option Series Reloaded Playbook. Today's video, we're going to be going through the read system. The read system is what gives us the flexibility that we need to be successful with the Pistol Spread Option Offense. It really is what makes us multifaceted. It's what makes us more complex, but through simplicity. So the system that we use is we will read every single person on the field. That is right. All 11 people on the field can be read at one point or another during the series of a game. They're not all the primary reads. Sometimes they're the secondary read, but we use them for both the run game, passing game. We use the same words, the same terminology for all the folks in our system. So without further ado, I want to get into the read system, explain to you what it is, what it does, how we use it, and how we become successful using the Pistol Spread Option read system. So first and foremost, we usually have a primary and a secondary read. We don't always. A lot of times we do a triple option, we'll have a primary and a secondary read. In our passing game, there's likely a primary and a secondary read. But sometimes it's just a single read. So what we do is we do read for a run game. We design our system to be read using a single person or a single player. We call it a gap system. So for us, we use the military alphabet to determine the primary read. And for our running game, the primary read in the A gap would be called alpha. So A for alpha. The defender that's in the B gap would be called Bravo. The defender in the C gap would be called Charlie, and the defender in the D gap would be known as Delta. So that is how we make our read system happen. The way that we're going to read those players is the first down lineman in that gap is our first primary read. If there is no down lineman in that gap, we would be looking at a linebacker. If there is no linebacker in the gap, then we'd be looking at a secondary player potentially. That's the order of priority in which we would read that gap defender. There is a situation where there may be no one in that particular gap. There's a head-up player. Someone that's really head up on a guard could be either an A gap or a B gap player. So we're going to talk about how we go through that as well. But for now, let's go back to the basics and talk about our run game. So when we say we're going to read alpha, we are reading the A gap defender. All right, this is an example of that A gap defender. This is a two gap player. That defensive tackle, in this case, the zero technique, could be an A gap player to the left, A gap player to the right. He's probably responsible for both in this scheme. That doesn't mean that's going to be the case. There could be a linebacker coming in and blitzing that particular gap, and they're running a slant or something like that. But for our purposes, the primary read in this play, because we called read alpha, we're looking for the A gap defender. All right, and I'll get into the calls in just a moment. If I want to go back and look at reading Bravo, our Bravo player is the B gap defender. In this case, again, he's head up on the guard, so we can talk about that in a moment. But the B gap defender is a Bravo player. If I want to read the C gap defender, I'm reading the Charlie player. That is the player in the C gap. Again, same scenario presents itself with an odd front where you're going to have a head up. So we'll talk about how to deal with that in a moment. And then we do have a Delta or a D gap defender. If we have a tight end in the game, for example, this particular player would be a Delta player or the D gap defender. So again, I can call just using a simple term, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, what gap do I want to read and what defender is in that gap am I going to be reading? So that is our read system. The primary system is Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. If we wanted to go to the head-up calls, so when we do have a head-up player, I'm going to talk about how we deal with that. If you look here in the middle of the PowerPoint, the over center means that there's a player in the A gap. The center is going to be calling a me call. What that means is that I am the guy that has a head-up defender on him. I am the A gap defender. This is the guy we're going to be reading. This is the guy directly over me. So the center calls me. And what that means is we're reading the alpha defender right here, head up on me. So let's talk about that. Let's look at that, what that looks like. So this is the particular scenario we talked about, where the center has a defender directly on his head. We have said I want to read the alpha defender, whether we're running right or left doesn't matter in this particular case, because the A gap defender is there. So in this particular scenario, the center would be making a me call, meaning that we're going to be reading the guy directly over him. So this becomes our primary read. Even though he's not directly in the A gap, he's the closest player we have to the A gap. We make the me call. If I were to go to the Bravo and do the same thing, we are going to use a golf call, meaning the guy over the guard. So golf, the guard would say, hey, look, I don't have a down lineman. I don't really have a true B gap player, but I do have a guy that's stacked over me, that guard gap. So we're going to make a golf call. And the golf call means that the guy that's directly over the guard, in this case, it's a linebacker, we are going to make a golf call, meaning, hey, the Bravo player is now the guy in this gap that's directly over me, the guard. If I have a C gap defender that's head up, I use the same terminology. This time it's a tango call, meaning I am the tackle, and I've got a guy directly over me. He is stacked on me. He is not declaring one gap or the other. So we're going to make a tango call, meaning that we're reading the player directly over the tackle. That is a tango call. So if I were to call read Charlie, and we see that we have a head-up defender, that tackle is going to say, hey, tango, tango, tango. That's telling the rest of the offensive line that this is my read, the guy that's directly over me, even though he's not directly in the C gap. So that is our primary read system. We have the me call for the center, the golf call for the guard, the tango call for the tackle. We use that same system throughout. Doesn't matter what play we're calling, if we're calling a zone read or whatever it is that we're calling. Whenever we're reading someone, it could be a play action pass, it could be a run pass option, it could be a triple option. That read system is used throughout this entire offense. So if I am going to call zone read alpha, that means I'm reading the A gap defender. If I'm running zone read Charlie, I would be reading the C gap defender. Very, very simple terminology. When we go to the passing game, it works exactly the same way. All right. We have this case, we aren't going to be reading the A gap, the B gap, the C gap, because that's not the way our passing game is designed. We're designed to be outside the tackles. We're designed to throw the ball downfield. So what we do is we use something different. We call an edge defender, an outside defender, and a safety. So for us, that is the Echo, meaning the edge, Oscar, meaning the outside defender, and Sierra, meaning the safety. So I'm going to click on Echo. We're going to talk about that edge defender. What I'm looking for is who is the person that's most likely responsible for setting the edge. The one that's going to be out here on the edge, he's going to come up and make sure that no one gets outside of him. In this particular case, it looks like an outside linebacker. So we aren't calling read linebacker. We're not calling read safety. We don't care. We're looking at the person that's most likely responsible for that edge defender. He is setting the edge. So for this, we're reading Echo, which means the edge defender. We believe in this case, it's probably this outside linebacker. Oscar is the outside defender. He is the furthest player on the outside of the defense. 99.9% of the time, it's the corner, but it doesn't always have to be. Sometimes they can invert and do some crazy things. But for us, when we say read Oscar, the primary read is the corner. All right. When would we use a scenario like this? We would be reading Oscar in a cover 2, for example. If I want to run a smash route, or I'm going to put the Y on the corner route, and I'm going to do a little hitch with the Z, I'm going to be reading this Oscar defender. If the Oscar stays short, I'm going to throw the deep ball. If the Oscar bails back and plays cover 4, I'm going to throw the short hitch to the Z. That is an example of when we would use read Oscar. So we're reading the outside defender in this case. That is called Oscar. The last one we have is our Sierra. That is our high safety. So in this case, the safety is the high safety over here. We're in a cover 2 look or a cover 2 shell. Then we are reading Sierra, which is the high safety. When would we use this? If we're running a post scenario or maybe a seams play where we're going to be putting guys down the seam. We're going to make him make a decision. That is a read Sierra scenario. So using the read system, I can use this for passing games. I can use this for run games. It doesn't matter. We're going to make our primary call. We could say zone read Charlie, meaning I'm reading the C gap defender. And then I could also tag on a secondary read. For example, we could say pitch Oscar. What that means is we're going to be pitching the ball off the outside defender. So he becomes my secondary read. So primary read was zone read Charlie. That means the C gap defender is primary, and the Oscar would be secondary if I called pitch Oscar. So what does that sound like in our system? Zone read Charlie, pitch Oscar. That is the play call. Now we can call right or left and set the direction. So that is an example of how we used the primary read. The secondary read in this system is used exactly the same way. And in this case, we are going to add our triple option tags, as I just brought up. So we could read the edge, we could read the outside man, or we could read the safety. Again, for us, that's Echo, Oscar, and Sierra. This gives us our triple option tag. So if I say zone read Charlie, I'm reading the C-gap defender primarily. My secondary read could be Sierra. So I could say I'm going to run zone read Charlie, and I'm going to run a bubble screen on Sierra. So Sierra becomes the secondary read in this case. So that is basically our triple option scheme. That is our pass game scheme. We can have a primary read and a secondary read. So there is a scenario where I could call a pass and say I want to read Sierra first, Oscar second. Or I want to read Oscar first, then I want to read Echo second. You really can determine with what your scheme is and what system you're using. If you're going to run a smash route, for example, read the Oscar first, read the Sierra second. So if the safety is biting on the corner route, you may have to go up the seam as an example, as a secondary read. But the system can be used for anything. Again, we can use it for our play action system. We can use it for our RPO. If I want to read the B-gap defender and I want to run an RPO or a slant behind him, if that B-gap defender steps up, then I'm going to be throwing the slant behind him. If the B-gap defender stays back and plays pass, then I'm going to hand off the ball. So that's how we can use our RPO system. That's how we can use our regular zone read system. That's how we can use our triple option system. It's all done through this basic read system. So one more time, I'm just going to go back and summarize. I can call a read on any one of the 11 defenders on the field. So in this particular case, my alpha, my center is making the me call, meaning we're going to read the guy directly over him. If I have a zone read Bravo, I'm looking at the B-gap defender. So there's my Bravo call. Again, this would be an example. I could run a slant behind him with the Y, and I can be running a dive with the H, and we make him make a decision. If he plays run, I throw the pass. If he plays pass, I give the ball. That's an example of how we can use this zone system with an RPO. Zone read Charlie is our C-gap defender, and I'm saying zone read. That's just a way we call our play systems, but we can read anybody. So in this particular case, we're going to read Charlie. It could be used for an option, a triple option, a zone read, that kind of a thing. And that's our C-gap defender. Again, that's a tango call for the tackle. Delta is our D-gap defender. In this case, he is the outside defender. Now, some of you may be asking, is he also the edge defender? It is possible that he is the edge defender, but for us, it's different terminology. Because he's on the line of scrimmage, we're going to read him as Delta. We're assuming that either this safety or this corner is going to be responsible for setting the edge. So that's a little bit different, a little bit of a nuance here, where he could potentially be the edge defender and the Delta. But in this case, we're calling him Delta because he is on the line of scrimmage. All right, last but not least is our secondary reads, where we can be looking at the edge defender, that is Echo, again, setting the edge. I can read the Oscar, which is the outside defender, or I can be reading the safety, which is the deepest defender to that side, which we call Sierra. So that is our zone read system. That is also our RPO system. That is also our pass game system. I can call a pass and say I want to read Oscar, call a pass and say I want to read Echo. It all works the same way, from RPOs to play action passes to zone reads to reading on anything, essentially. So the way we've set up our system is that we can read any defender at any time on almost any play that we have. So hopefully you've learned a little bit about our read system. When you combine that with our blocking scheme, and as you go through the remainder of these videos, you're going to learn how to pull all these together, where the formations to set up, to give you that blocking scheme in the zone, to give you that read system to tell you who you're going to be reading. So I hope you learned a little bit here in the zone read system. Again, hit like, hit share. I want to make sure that coaches have the opportunity to really learn from our system. It's called the pistol spread option. That's just a name. It could really be used anywhere, anytime, in almost any scheme because it's so flexible. Thanks for joining. Again, this is Coach Pratley. I appreciate you being on today. And make sure you hit like and share. And thanks for joining us.